G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here with a bit of an update onto the bridge over the Mann River on the old Grafton Road. The bridge which my son drove over while it was burning on the 8th of November because it was the only way to get his fire truck onto Wytaliba, the alternative lifestyle multiple occupancy community, 50 kilometres by road to the east of Glen Innes. That was a Friday night. By the following day, Saturday, the council had gone down with a bulldozer and put in a temporary causeway, so there was four-wheel drive access to the property. And while the drought continued, that causeway functioned pretty well. But then plan A was to have the army come along and set up a temporary bridge which would function for a year while we waited for council to rebuild a permanent road bridge over the Mann River. But there was some rain in December. January there was 4.5 inches. February has been so wet, I've put 5 tonnes of rainwater off the roof of the hut, through the buoy walls, through the pipeline, 500 metres away downhill and into the dam. The springs have opened up, and if the old bridge was still there, right at the moment, it would be looking like that, as it so often has in the past. In fact, there's been quite a lot of rain in around here, kind of the 100 to 200 millimetres. So the first thing that happened when the army arrived was it rained, and that meant that they couldn't really start pouring concrete. And as it rained, doing something bigger and better than a causeway became a priority, because even though they'd put in a decent causeway with pipes buried in it, when it rained, the river would rise and it would wash out the causeway. So 13th of February, new Wytaliba Bridge to be finished in a fortnight. Council Director of Infrastructure Services Keith Appleby hopes the job of repairing the bridge into Wytaliba will be done by next weekend, quote, weather permitting. That will give council enough time to build a permanent bridge, a process that might take about a year. The wooden bridge was wrecked last year, leaving concrete supports. More on page 3, opinion on page 5. Glen Innes Mayor Carol Sparks talks to Adam Marshall-Wright at the site of Wytaliba's wrecked bridge. And this fella's the new town general manager. National Party members of Parliament want to go in and rape the national parks. Woman been charged with armed robbery. Wytaliba Bridge, destroyed in last year's deadly bushfire, will be rebuilt. And over here, the ADF has shelved plans to install a temporary Bailey Bridge into Wytaliba. Instead, the Glen Innes Severn Council has organised to install a single 12-metre portable bridge to be installed over the river. Over coming days, the Army will build a crane pad in order to allow that to happen. The temporary bridge will be installed on what is currently the temporary ford across the Mann by Glen Innes crane contractor J. Weir. Council Director of Infrastructure Services Keith Appleby hopes the job will be done by next weekend, weather permitting. That will give council enough time to build a permanent bridge, a process that might take about a year. In a media release this week, Adam Marshall said a permanent bridge is more important than ever, with the council's temporary ford washed out on no less than 4 occasions. Quote, Wytaliba is currently experiencing the absolute worst Mother Nature has to offer, with bushfires destroying homes and now heavy rain cutting access to the old Grafton Road, he said. Right, well, so that was plan B. Today is the 27th of February. As I understand it, tomorrow or the next day, J. Weir will take delivery of a new big crane that's big enough to lift the new big 12-metre section, which has apparently already been constructed and is at Grafton. So yeah, that's yet to occur. Plan C was announced in a paper which sadly has already been used for firelighters. Whip me on the toenail with a wet bootlace, I'm a naughty bad boy. But it showed a picture of the army using what looked to be a Phantom 4. That's a quadcopter with a little gimbal for having a camera on it, white painted straight out of the shop. At least that's going by the controller, the transmitter in the army bloke's hands showing in the photo. He could have been controlling anything with it. I didn't see any picture of the drone. But they used a drone to carry a light piece of string across the river, and then they used the light piece of string to pull across a heavier piece of string, and they used the heavier piece of string to pull across a light rope, and then they used the light rope to pull across a fairly heavy rope, like something around 25 mil diameter, maybe 40 mil diameter, a decent, serious tie up a pretty big boat type of a rope. And they anchored it, I'm assuming they anchored it between two trees. And they used this as a support for what they call a zip line, which looks something like that. The rope is anchored firmly on either side, and running backwards and forwards across the rope, there is a thing like a pulley block. Hanging under the pulley block, there's a hook. Suspended from the hook is a basket. In the basket, you can put light supplies, maybe a backpack weighing 20 kilos, perhaps. And with two additional light ropes, people on either side coordinate between them. If they're really bright, they'll have return wheels at each of the anchors, and it will be a loop of rope, so you can't drop the end and lose it. So all you really should have to do is pull on the rope to make the basket go backwards and forwards and carry stuff. So that was announced in the newspaper about a week ago with great fanfare. Yahoo yippee, they've got a zip line. And it was made solemnly clear that the zip line, as described, was not fit for purpose to carry people backwards and forwards. Can't do that, naughty, naughty. Don't even think about it, you can't do that. Okay. That wasn't particularly convenient, and something that wasn't mentioned was that the state emergency services were going to be in charge of it, and they refused to transport beer or cigarettes because both are perfectly lawful. People buy them as part of their groceries. There's nothing on Australia's laws anywhere that says the state emergency services gets to be censoring anybody else's groceries. Therefore, the state emergency services said that there's nobody going to be allowed to put beer or cigarettes on the zip line carrying groceries to Wytalibans who are stranded because the bridge has burnt down and then fallen into the river, and now it's flooded. So the Wytalibans, they're a resourceful bunch. They are a resourceful bunch. One of them on the town side of the river went to a disposal shop or a boat shop and spent $150 and bought a rubber blow-up boat. They would have bought a sheet metal dinghy, a tinny, but they didn't have a roof rack on their car, so therefore it was a rubber ducky. And then they came back and blew up the rubber ducky and attached the painter, which is the correct nautical term for the short bit of rope at the front end of any boat. They attached the painter from the rubber ducky onto the hook on the zip line's pulley. So they weren't asking the sacred 40 mil nylon rope stretched between two anchor points. I don't know, I'm assuming they were trees. They weren't asking the rope to carry the weight of a person suspended in tension across the river. No. They were asking the rubber blow-up boat to carry the weight of a person. And the boat would float on the river, and the boat would face into the current, streaming downstream, downriver. And then the two people pulling on their little ropies, they could essentially move the anchor point of the boat backwards and forwards across the stream with the boat remaining parallel. And I don't know, I'm not a hydrologist, but I would say likely there would be considerably less tension strain applied to that rope by being an anchor point for a rubber ducky with two people, perhaps, than it would if it was trying to carry 40 pounds of groceries in a backpack and vertically suspend the backpack above the waters of the raging Man River, which looks something like that when it's fully on, and which actually kind of looks a bit like that. So you would think that the powers that be, the administrators of authority, would be pleased with such a demonstration of initiative, wouldn't you? Okay, so Mayor of the town went down there and asked the army fellas who were building the crane pad, could they be of any assistance? Because there was her and another woman and literally a one-legged hippie, and she hadn't used the setup before and she didn't quite know what to be doing about it. And the army's response was, oh no, terribly sorry, we're not trained for water operations. So Squirrel and her mate and the one-legged hippie were assisted by the police in operating the zip line, which was in fact anchored to a sturdy tree. And the SES's dog had kittens. Their sheep gave birth to a cow or something, I don't know. But anyway, let's just read this. Emergency Services by Andrew Messenger. A zip line connected on Saturday last week to resupply the bushfire-affected community of Wytaliba could be taken down after residents allegedly used it to unsafely cross the swollen Man River. Emergency services say residents flouted a rule banning them from using the boat and pulley system to travel back and forth across the river. The local recovery committee say they can't prevent them from repeatedly risking their lives using the boat improperly. Their only solution could be to remove the days-old pulley system. Wytaliba resident Brett Miller said it felt like they were being treated like misbehaving naughty kids. If they take the zip line away, that's another kick in the face, unquote, he said. Mr. Miller has lived in Wytaliba for 26 years. He said the SES had already, quote, flatly refused to bring in beer or cigarettes by boat and speculated they wouldn't want to by helicopter either. Quote, so that's not going to work for us at all, unquote. The Man River Bridge was written off in last year's bushfire, which also claimed 2 lives and more than 50 homes. The community has relied on a ford since then, but the river has swollen after monsoonal rain and wrecked for the 5th time this year. Wrecked it for the 5th time this year. The village has now been out of contact with the outside world for a week and a half, according to Mr. Miller, except by the zip line. Glen Innes Police Inspector Matt Hemsworth, who leads the region's recovery committee, said one solution they're considering adopting is chartering a weekly commercial helicopter flight to carry food to the 71 residents of the isolated village, all because the SES doesn't want to allow people to do something practical that works. He said the zip line had become unsafe after people using the boat had overloaded the wire and reduced tension on what was intended to be a short-term fix. It could collapse without warning, with potentially deadly results. Police cannot maintain a 24-hour, 7-day watch on the crossing to keep residents from risking their safety, he said. But the local emergency operations controller vowed nobody in Wytaliba would be left without some way of getting food and water, whatever option emergency services chose. We'll always have the safety of the residents as a top priority. Not a priority, a top priority. As a top place for priests to live. A top priority. Yes, I see it now. We'll always have their sustenance, their food, water, and medical always at the top of our mind. We're coming together as a group of agencies to put together the best solution. Glen Innes Mayor Carol Sparks, who lost a house in Wytaliba during last November's deadly bushfire, said she was frustrated that the community continues to be cut off. Said with extreme delicacy, Squirrel. A company of engineers was tasked with establishment of a new bridge, but the Army's first solution failed when they discovered their Bailey bridges wouldn't fit. Reputedly, the Bailey bridges are too short to run from pylon to pylon. Which kind of seems strange. I thought Bailey bridges came in several different sizes. I mean, basically, it's a description of a Warren girder supporting a deck which is transportable. You know, the little ones and big ones and medium-sized ones. 30-odd years ago, I think, a bloke called Peter Harvey, he's dead now, but he was the Shire engineer, and he wanted the Glen Innes 7 Shire Council, as it was back then before amalgamation, he wanted them to buy some Bailey bridges which were being sold off by the army as surplus. Don't need them anymore, too old, not going to use them. Something new, shiny in the inventory. And he wanted to use them to replace all the timber bridges. Maybe it was just one of them, but we had a lot of timber bridges which were starting to go rattly, and he thought just put Bailey bridges in because you can't get the timber to rebuild them on the original plan. It'd be very expensive to do it properly. So he had to organise a special fact-finding tour and take the councillors, as a bunch of them in a bus out the other side of Ashford somewhere, to put their hands on it and look at it and feel it and pet it and touch it and get it clear in their head what a Bailey Bridge was. And then they came back and they voted not to do it because somebody else said that if you laid a thin concrete deck with steel reinforcement in it over the top of your old wooden bridge, which was getting rickety, then the weight of the concrete would squash the loose, cracked old wooden timbers down and push them all together, and that would stop it from making noises when traffic drove over it, and that could extend the life of the bridge by 20 or 30 years. Well, 20 or 30 years is here. So yeah, once upon a time, there were some Bailey bridges that were being sold as surplus, and today the Army doesn't have any Bailey bridges that are big enough for the job. And the scuttlebutt, the grapevine, the rumour, the word on the street, in the main street of Glen Innes, is that there are some Bailey bridges big enough to do the job. They're in a shed in Wallangarra and the Army doesn't own them. So there is that. There is also the fact that the same Wytaliban who bought the rubber ducky boat to hang the hook of the pulley on the zip line, he's the Wytaliban who's been going down there with his own personal tractor and fixing the causeway, so that as of yesterday, when I was talking to the person who backgrounded and briefed me on this subject, as of yesterday, there was still four-wheel drive access to and from Wytaliba. Not because of what the council's done, not because of what the Army's done. Despite everything the SES has done, the Wytalibans keep effecting their own ingress and egress route. The only people to help them have been the police. And the zip line has been pulled down. As of yesterday, the reason the causeway was back in use was because the hypertensive farces of the Nanny-State, as epitomised by the SES apparently, waved their little finger and caused it to be taken down because it was unsafe. It was unsafe. Potentially unsafe. They might not know what's good for them. How can they know what's good for them? They haven't been to my training school, have they? So, yes, Wytaliba has been kicked in the face. Because, you know, you can't let stranded people have beer and cigarettes as part of their weekly grocery delivery, can you? Oh, shit, no. What would the wowsers think of that? Wobbles on a lot to YouTube. Rebuilding patience. Ciao.